Today I'm going to talk about applications themselves. Okay, so let's get started. Come on, kitty cat, really? She's looking for treats. Hey! So a lot has been going on in the past few months. Your girl is going to law school. I know my channel is all over the place. It is. So I'm gonna be real, the admissions process took a lot out of me, especially with the Rona going on. So I decided to make a series of videos about my admissions process. This video is gonna be the first of that series, and today I'm gonna talk about the application process itself. Okay, so step one, and I feel like this one goes without saying, and it's pretty obvious, but go to college. There aren't any prerequisites or any classes in particular that you need to take, but you do need to finish, and you do need to get the highest grades possible. Second, decide where you want to apply. Don't base your decision purely on rankings, but for the sake of awareness, I feel like I need to talk about it. A media company called US News and World Report puts out college rankings, program rankings every year. Pretty much if you've applied to any college or program, you've run into their rankings. US News and World Report uses this. For law school rankings, US News and World Report places the highest weight on something called peer assessment. Peer assessment is basically the law school's reputation in the field of law. Whether they intend for it to come out this way or not is lost on me, but the higher a school is ranked, the higher number of graduates they have that go on to big law and elite clerkships. Also, if you take a look at the current Supreme Court justice lineup, 100% of them went to Harvard, Yale, or Columbia. Some big law firms won't even consider you as an applicant if you didn't go to one of those schools. Fun fact, law schools, as we know them now, weren't really even a big thing until the 1900s. People used to do these things called apprenticeships, and you would learn under someone who was already practicing the law. You basically just learned whatever the person you were working under wanted to teach you. So let's just imagine the elitism that set up. It was pretty much the playbook for the old boys club, and if you weren't in it, there was no way you were going to practice law. And when law school finally became a thing, I'm sure you can imagine who got the first shot at going. For the reasons I listed, there's a lot of controversy around law school rankings. It's basically an elitist system that keeps older, rich, white, Ivy League institutions at the top. Also, to an extent, I clearly live in and participate in this world, so there's that. Anyhow, back to rankings themselves, it basically breaks down into tiers. And depending on who you ask, the first tier consists of the first 14 schools. Once you go to undergrad and you decide where you want to go to law school, you have to do the next step and my least favorite part in the admissions process, which is take a standardized test. You can take either the GRE or the LSAT. I personally took the GRE, and I'll go into that in a separate video. Some schools don't require you to send in standardized tests, but they're few and far between. And I advise anyone who's taking standardized tests for law school to study for them as hard as you humanly can. These tests and your scores are largely going to determine which schools are likely to accept you, and once you get in, it's going to determine the amount of scholarship money that you're considered for, if they offer merit-based aid. Alright, so the next step I'm going to talk about is something called the Credential Assembly Service. I'm talking about it as step number 4, but realistically you should start this as early in your application process as you can. Before you actually go out and pay for the Credential Assembly Service, which I'm going to start calling CAS from this point forward because that's just really long to say, make sure that the school you're applying to actually accepts it. It costs $200. It's basically like the common application for law schools. And you don't want to buy it unless you absolutely have to. For most of the top law schools, CAS is not optional and it's the only way for you to apply. CAS is a place where you upload your transcripts, your letters of recommendation, your character and fitness statement, your essays, and ultimately submit your application as a whole. Once you submit your application, it's going to generate something called a law school report. You'll be able to know when a law school requests your report, which is basically the conglomeration of all your application materials, because it'll show up on the CAS website. Also, after that, a university will also typically send you an admissions tracker. So here's a couple of tips about CAS. If you went to multiple schools and received college credit, you need to make sure that you upload all of your transcripts to CAS. For example, I attended a community college or a 3-credit math course in the summer. Not only did I have to upload my separate transcript for that community college, but I got a B in that class. And LSAT, the company that administers all of these application materials, recalculated my GPA, and that B pulled my GPA down a little bit. Try to request your transcripts as early as possible. You can request most of them through an online portal, but in the event that the school you went to doesn't have electronic transcripts, you're gonna have to use a snail mail process, which can probably take up to 4 weeks. Another tip for CAS is asking your recommenders for letters of recommendation about 4 to 6 weeks before you plan to send your application. It can take a little while for those to be uploaded, even if they do them electronically. And again, if they decide to snail mail them in, that can take even longer. They don't have to personalize each recommendation per se. You can send one recommendation from one person to multiple schools. Spend a lot of time on your personal statement and essays. You get one shot to show admissions who you are, and you need to make the best of it. The final piece of advice that I have for CAS is if you have any crazy history on your academic record or on your personal record, you should probably disclose that in your application. You'll have to disclose this information once you take the bar eventually, and it's best to be transparent about all of that up front. So stepping away from CAS and back to applications overall, once you have all your ducks in a line, you should read over your application materials. All of them. Multiple times. Read over them, read them out loud, have someone else look over them, but you want to make sure that you look over all of those materials for typos or any discrepancies or anything before you press submit. Step 6 is the moment of truth. That's when you actually submit your application. Once you do, CAS will roll up everything that you have into something called a report. You'll be able to see when a law school requests your law school report on the CAS website. Each law school you apply to will also send you a useless admissions tracker so that you can track your application through their process. These can be helpful at some schools and very not helpful at others. Pro tip about application timing: the early bird kind of gets the worm. Some schools will tell you that if you apply by a certain date, you'll receive a decision by a certain date. For the most part, this can be extremely helpful unless the school decides to hold your application or waitlist you. The final step in applying to law schools, and this is the hardest, is wait. Wait for your admissions decisions to roll in. The entire law school application process is made for you to compare yourself to others. For those reasons, I advise that you stay away from all those forums and all of those other things that could really make this process even more anxiety-inducing. Your mental health is worth its weight in gold, and you should cherish that. For my next video, I'm going to talk about my process of taking the GRE instead of the LSAT for law school. I'd love to see your comments below. What do you think about law school rankings, and what are some tips and tricks you use during your application process? That's all I got for today, and I'll see you in a couple of days.